Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. Joining me this evening via Skype, I have, first of all, Dave Tucker, a Rural Affairs correspondent. Welcome back to the programme, Dave. And also with me, as usual, my regular cohort, Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. Welcome back, Chris.
Hi, Gordon.
And of course, it's a big day today with the announcement of Nicola Sturgeon's exit plan. But before we get to that, I'm just going to read through the statistics for the coronavirus for today. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there has now been a total of 44,799 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 35,390 tests were confirmed negative. 9,409 tests were positive. 148 patients were in intensive care last night, with 134 of those having tested positive. There were a total of 1,748 people in hospital, either confirmed or suspected COVID-19. And this marks an increase of 366 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 1,120. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 18,738 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 425,821 people have been tested, of which 287,743 were negative and 138,078 were confirmed positive. Now, if I might first come to you, Dave, because I haven't seen you for a while. I've been speaking to Chris quite a lot recently. I know you've had a very busy time with the lambing. Hopefully you've had time to rest up. But it seems from these figures that we seem to have reached some kind of a plateau in the numbers at last.
Well, that's what everybody's hoping, isn't it?
Well, indeed, but the figures actually showing slight decreases in the numbers of deaths, I believe. We're talking small numbers, maybe 8, I think, fewer deaths today. So it's a very small decrease. But all the same, I think the signs look encouraging.
Absolutely, yes. I still don't think we should lift the lockdown.
No, I think that's going to be around for a while. We'll be coming, of course, back to that later on in the programme. Chris, if I might come to you next. Are you surprised, Chris, that these figures appear to be levelling out at long last? Or have you been expecting this?
Well, I think we've been looking forward to it more than expecting it. It's welcome news indeed. But again, with these figures being announced, I would probably echo what Dave said, and just urge people not to be complacent.
Well, I've heard it said, Chris, by particularly by critics of the First Minister, strangely enough, that it might actually be the case that the new hospital that's been built, the Overspill Hospital at the SEC, is actually perhaps not even going to be needed. I mean, this is what people have been saying apparently, but I would have said that's a measure of the success of the policies so far.
Yes, well, absolutely.
The actual resource that's been put into Louisa Jordan is absolutely, it's to be lauded. It's a great achievement, and the First Minister all along has said, hopefully we don't have to use it, and I would certainly agree with her on that. Forgetting the Louisa Jordan to one side just for a second, and actually concentrate on all the other established hospitals that are doing, an absolute fantastic job in preventing the Louisa Jordan being used, I think is, testament to our Scottish NHS.
Yeah. Dave, if I could come back to you for a second, I know you were anxious to comment there. What was your take on this particular subject? The idea that the the actual actions that the government are taking so far appear to be working, and maybe it will come to pass that we don't need to use this hospital. God forbid we don't want to use it.
Yes, I think it's called forward planning, and there's no doubt that the Scottish Government under Nicola Sturgeon have done their forward planning. Unlike down south, their forward planning seems to be non-existent. And no doubt she will get pilloried if it isn't used, and the people will say, "Oh, it's a waste of money." It isn't a waste of money. It's a backup that's there should anything else happen. And goodness knows, we just don't know yet. We're not out of it yet. Anything could happen if people start mixing and, getting the virus going again. And apparently it is going to come back in the winter time. It's going to be a recurring thing. And I know my neighbour, who's a professor, he's a veterinary professor, right enough, but he was talking about 100 years of this virus hanging about us all.
Well, I've had conversations on a similar vein to those as well, that the virus will be around for some considerable time. And I'd like to, at this point, if I may, just move on to our next story, which of course is about when the lockdown may or may not be lifted, but more particularly, this is about the Scottish Government publishing its exit strategy framework today. The Scottish Government today published its decision-making framework for beginning to lift the restrictions imposed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in Scotland. The document, unveiled by the First Minister at her press briefing this afternoon, stresses that decisions should be taken with the goal of minimising overall harm to the Scottish population, both from the coronavirus outbreak itself and from the social and economic harms created by the lockdown measures, including loss of incomes from work, increased isolation of vulnerable people, and the effects on children resulting from school closures. The strategy will not mean a return to how things were before the lockdown began some weeks ago. The new normal will include a continued focus on hand and cough hygiene for an indefinite period, as well as continued physical distancing in most settings. Perhaps most importantly, the strategy describes the importance of testing, contact tracing and quarantining of anyone suspected of contact with the virus, in line with World Health Organization guidelines. Shielding of vulnerable groups such as older people and those with compromised immune systems is expected to remain necessary for some time until a vaccine can be rolled out. There may also be measures to open up different parts of the economy and society at different times, depending on the risk as judged by the best scientific advice available. Work outdoors, for example, may be possible before work in more crowded indoor settings. Certain geographical areas may see some restrictions lifted before others, depending on the prevalence of the virus in each area. The framework also stresses that Scotland cannot work alone on these matters, and that port health, or the effect of international travel on the spread of the disease, the Scottish Government will continue to urge the UK Government to improve screening of people entering the country. Meanwhile, all regulations will be reviewed every 3 weeks by the Parliament, with the understanding that restrictions should be lifted as soon as it is safe to do so, but not sooner. I think I'll start with you on this one, Chris. This is obviously an announcement by the government of how they hope to start thinking about lifting the lockdown. But these really what they've published are details of the complicated and complex issues that they have to sift through before any lifting can happen.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you said that word, Gordon, which is thinking about it, because since the briefing this afternoon, we've had headlines from various, shall we say, mainstream media outlets, which are alluding to the fact that Nicola has now brought out a blueprint for exiting the lockdown, which is, quite frankly, a load of keech. That's not what she said. What she said was, we will start to have the conversation about what it might look like, what could possibly be involved, and then we'll take bits from other countries and we'll put them into the pot and we'll take wee bits and pieces from other places, and then we'll possibly set out what we think could be possible. So it's nowhere near a blueprint as was suggested in the Independent. You had sensationalist headlines from, I don't know, it was either the Daily Record or the Sun, suggesting that that Christmas is back on and all the rest of it.
Yes, I heard that this morning as well.
We have to take it exactly at our words, and this is the thing, that Nicola has been clear, concise, and consistent in everything that she has said, and people just running off at letting their imaginations run wild will not help the situation.
Well, I think certainly one daily newspaper was attempting to draw the First Minister into becoming the sort of modern day version of the Grinch, by all accounts. Dave, if I can speak to you on this for a moment, it's also, there's a lot to take out of what has been published by the Scottish Government today, and it's quite complicated to pick through it all. But one of the things that came out of it, from my point of view, and I hope you might have some comment on this, was a return to tracing and testing. Which was something which wasn't done earlier on in the outbreak, which one might have expected to have continued. This testing, tracing, and isolating people who've come into contact with the virus. Ms. Sturgeon was saying that she plans to ramp this up dramatically in the near future.
Yeah, very good for her too. She probably wishes that she had done that, but equally, she had to, I think, or she felt she had to run with the UK government at the very start. Well, she's done that. She's given them their opportunity. And since then, they've made such a hash of it that she's perfectly entitled now to start to look after her own country and not just try and run with what the UK is doing.
Yeah, the other thing that came out of this day, which, I mean, I've read this just a few moments ago, is the idea of somehow or other managing to get the UK to do more to prevent, well, not prevent, but to screen people coming into the country from abroad. And this doesn't seem to be happening very often at the moment, or certainly not in the detail.
I've heard commentators saying that you can't do it at airports. It's not effective. And that was the excuse as to why they didn't do it. And yet we did see people holding up thermometer type things to see if they had a temperature, as they did with the Ebola. So that there must be something that they could do, but they were actually not doing anything.
It's also, I think, worth remembering that most people who come into Scotland do so through other United Kingdom airport hubs like Heathrow and Stansted and Luton and Manchester, and often are taking internal flights from those English airports back into Scotland. And yet it seems that we don't have the ability yet to perhaps have our own people on hand in Scottish airports to screen those people who've come on from UK airports. Chris, maybe you could take this question. This is really right up your alley in terms of airports.
Indeed, we have to remember that first and foremost, the question of borders is actually a reserved matter. So what I would want to see is I would want the SNP parliamentary group putting pressure onto the UK government to say, OK, look, you don't want to test at Heathrow, that's absolutely fine. But if anybody comes into Scotland, Glasgow Airport, Edinburgh Airport, Aberdeen Airport, whatever, they will get tested, and we will, physically do this ourselves. When you step off an aircraft, you have to go down through a large corridor, long, big corridor, and go through the passport control. Now, for an internal flight, you don't have to do that. Chris, but you still have to go through the same. There is no other way.
Yeah, I was just. I thought it's just occurred, Chris, that perhaps Scotland does have devolved powers over things like environmental health, for example. and public health, and therefore
Yes,
maybe
they do,
those
and they
devolved
should,
powers might be used. They might be used to come up with some form of basic screening.
Yes, and they do, and that's what I would want the SNP to point out to the UK government, and make sure that it's all signed, sealed, and delivered before we actually start doing it. And this is one way. And Nicola's has said many times that she will not shy away from diverging from the four nation approach. But my point was, Gordon, was that if you land at Heathrow, if you land from Heathrow, Stansted, Luton, Gatwick, you name it, when you get into Glasgow, you still have a corridor to actually go through. The capacity is there. And I know from the geography of Glasgow Airport, there are many annex rooms that you could set up. Obviously, the one big one I can possibly think of just now is the duty free. They could just take that whole shop out and use that as a holding pen.
Yeah.
And just even if they just put a thermometer under someone's tongue, and if they're showing any signs of a temperature, they get put to one side and they get taken away. It's perfectly possible to do.
Chris, of course, this would have to be applied to everybody coming in through the arrivals passageways.
Yeah,
and anybody who with the temperature, as you say, would have to be sort of diverted off. But they'd have to be quarantined, surely.
Correct. Yes, and that's what I'm saying.
If they have a temperature,
there are two ways that you actually come into Glasgow Airport. There's the domestic arrivals and there's the international arrivals, and there are many doors and many corridors and there are many rooms.
Of course,
that can be utilised in order to test people, and then if you're not showing signs, you can go on your way rejoicing, and if you are showing signs, you can get taken out to the one side, and the ambulance could turn up and take you across the actual apron of the airport, out through the south gates, and then down to the hospital.
Chris,
it's perfectly easy to do.
Chris, there's one surefire way of guaranteeing that everybody coming off a plane who's come in from abroad through an English airport to Glasgow or Edinburgh or wherever, and that is to quarantine everybody as soon as they get off the plane. Because it's the only way you can guarantee that those people are clear of the disease.
Yeah, but you can only do that. You can only guarantee that as well. You would need to guarantee the fact that the aircraft are actually sanitized as well.
Indeed, yeah. It's a can of worms, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
If the person or the people on the plane have been quarantined for 2 weeks and they're all clear, then the state of the aircraft doesn't really matter that much, I guess. Depends how often the plane is doing that trip, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, I will cite my younger nephew who was working for Clyde Marine out in India, and he'd been stranded on a ship for something like 72 days. He eventually managed to get airlifted to the mainland in India. As soon as he touched India, he was tested straight away, and then India cleared them for air travel.
How was he tested, Chris?
Sorry?
How was he tested?
I don't know the full procedure. I just know that he
was screened, though, in some way.
He had been on the ship for 72 days. Nobody on the ship had shown any signs of COVID. When he got to the mainland of India, the Indian authorities done whatever test that they do.
Chris, forgive me saying this, Chris,
but yes, okay, you can fly out of India.
Chris,
and that was straight over to Heathrow. And then when he got to Heathrow, this is very important. When he got to Heathrow, they just hired a car and drove up to Scotland.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that there is no protection when you come into the United Kingdom.
Absolutely none whatsoever. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. They had because he's a member of the Merchant Navy. They had government papers. They had government documents clearing them to travel. and back to his place of origin.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chris, if you're on a ship for months on end, then you're effectively quarantined anyway. And if you haven't had the disease in 53 days, then you can't have the disease. You would have shown up eventually as symptomatic, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, Dave, there's something here for us as well to talk about, and that is that I know that in your particular field, sorry, Dave, you're on this side tonight, in your particular field of animal husbandry, there's a great deal of contact tracing done, isn't there? There's a great deal done on the provenance of animals, where they've been, who they've been in contact with. And yet we don't seem to be applying this to human beings for some reason.
No, we don't. But then your animals aren't travelling to the same extent as human beings are these days.
I guess not.
I know at the foot and mouth, that was the start of when the EU said, right, enough is enough. You have to have EID tags on your livestock, and then we can trace exactly where they've come from, where they go to, and where they end up. But you're still only talking a few moves, whereas human beings they're all over the place and all over the world.
I have heard some suggestions from quite reliable government sources about the idea of tracking people's movements so they don't come into contact with each other, and I don't know, doing that in some way by using GPS, like in your phone, so that they can tell where you've been and who you've been near to.
Well, that's true. I mean, that's easily done, isn't it? If I wanted, I could set up something on my phone and my husband's phone so that each of us knew exactly where we were at any particular point in time. I mean, we don't do that, but I do know some couples who do that.
Well, and our next story, actually, which we're about to come to just shortly, is actually about this very subject. And I think I could probably go into this story just now, as it seems an appropriate time to talk about it. Now, this is the response from the Scottish Greens to the Scottish Government's framework for tackling COVID-19. The Scottish Government's framework for tackling the COVID-19 crisis will require further commitments to utilise Scotland's testing capacity, the Scottish Greens have said today. Following questions from Greens parliamentary co-leaders Alison Johnson and Patrick Harvie, the Scottish Government has published a framework which is committed to test, trace and isolate strategy to beat the virus. But the Scottish Greens have warned that more detail is needed to realise that vision, especially when Scotland is not using the testing capacity it currently has. Responding, Greens co-leader Patrick Harvie said, "I am pleased that the Scottish Government is responding with open discussion, especially when public trust in processes is key. It's clear that we are not in a position to ease the lockdown anytime soon. I also welcome the recognition that a one-size-fits-all exit strategy for the UK is inappropriate, and instead we should base decisions on the science and local circumstances." Well, it's good to see a clear commitment to test, trace and isolate approach advocated by the World Health Organization and experts here in Scotland. The big question remains about how this will be implemented. In Scotland, just like the UK, Scotland has increased its capacity for testing, but it's not using that capacity. Why not? And how will we ensure that even bigger increases in testing are actually delivered? We need the data. What is being done to build and train contact tracing teams? Will this be done by health boards, by local councils, or by the Scottish Government centrally? What role could the voluntary sector and community organisations play to increase the reach of contact tracing? And how will people's personal data be protected, especially if GPS apps are to be used to monitor people's proximity? This document moves the debate forward in very helpful ways, but it must now be followed up with detail on how these plans will be implemented. So, like many other people, I think, who listened to Nicola Sturgeon's quite lengthy explanation of how they plan to go about this, the Greens are now calling for more detail. And of course, at the moment, Chris, as far as I know, they don't have that detail yet.
Well, no, we don't. But Jean Freeman actually made the point that we have got 21,000 volunteers who have came forward since the government put out that plea, and you know the the vast majority of that 21,000 are ex-NHS staff. They are also students in their last year. So, I mean, there are people there that can take these jobs on, and it is a case of redeploying and learning new skills, and actually sort of like being allocated that specific job to do. Now, again, obviously, they have looked into the numbers that they would need in order to staff the Louisa Jordan. And quite clearly, if the Louisa Jordan isn't going to be used, then that allocation of staff that they have very possibly already earmarked could then be redeployed in order to start this test, trace, and So I mean, there is that sort of like wider plan that Jean Freeman has actually pointed out. So I don't think that we should be sort of like all of a sudden panicking. And at the same token, I'm totally in agreement with the Greens. But it would be ludicrous to suggest that the Scottish Government have not already thought about all this.
No, I'm sure they have, Chris.
Having constant meetings and discussions.
But to pick up, Chris, just wanted to pick up something which the First Minister had said during her briefing today, which was that they're going to start the whole thing of tracing people's movements again and testing. But she mentioned the fact that it wasn't just going to be at this initial small scale. There were plans to ramp it up by, sort of an order of magnitude to create a much bigger effort in tracing and screening individuals to know where the disease was cropping up, where people had been and where it was likely to pop up next.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not a great technophobe and stuff like that. I heard you talking today there about, having a possible phone app to, monitor your every movement through GPS or, satellites in the sky and whatnot, what have you. Mm-hmm. But our satellites in the sky, they're going to be able to say, right, okay, Joe Soap went down to the co-op today and now he's back. But what happened in between him leaving the house and going to the co-op? What did they touch?
Well, of course, these are details. Chris, can I throw this over to Dave for a moment? Because one of the things, we were just talking about the idea of using phone apps, Dave. And one of the things which has just occurred to me this moment while I was talking to Chris is that, of course, our phone records, our cell phones, they can be tracked wherever they have travelled because the GPS signal in every cell phone is constantly pinging a location. So we should be able to track virtually anybody in Scotland who's had a mobile phone on them and who's perhaps been in contact with somebody with the virus.
Well, and I understand the police can already do that. And I know a lot of the farmers have apps so that if you have an accident anywhere, you can be traced. And all you've got to do is supply some kind of code or other. I think there's two issues here. There's the one about that sort of traceability, but the other one is ensuring that everybody on the doctor's surgery list is contacted to have a test. I mean, everybody can be contacted, surely.
Uh-huh. So you think that everybody on a doctor's sort of role, as it were, should have some kind of way of being tracked and traced through their medical records as well, or just through through GPS?
I mean, all that is already set up on the National Health Service. But there will be gaps. I mean, obviously, there are people who are not, so there will be gaps.
Of course, tracing is only going to happen with somebody who has had contact with the virus or is symptomatic of having the virus, and they're going to look at where they went and who they interacted with. One of the things that strikes me about this is if an electronic system is used like the mobile phone network, that it's not, as Chris was saying earlier on, the medical staff who would do this tracing. it would need to be probably technology people who would do the tracing. Maybe the police or some other branch of, the sort of civilians who serve the police in matters where they're trying to track people down.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, I can just hear everybody screaming. The Liberal say, "Oh, human rights will be violated, etc., etc." And to an extent, they're right, but.
In the case of a life being at risk or lives being at risk, I think perhaps people might be prepared to surrender a little bit of their human rights.
Yes.
Well, anyway, the other question is with tracing. If people are symptomatic of having the disease, or people know they've been exposed to it, they should really be self-isolating as well, straight away, and informing the authorities. Chris, is there at the moment, as far as you know, I know that you're not the oracle of every SNP and every government policy or action, but there must be some kind of department already in existence for this kind of tracing.
I would assume, like Day said, I would assume that there'd be something within the justice remit. Which would encompass, obviously, people's movements, which would, could possibly be monitored by the police. But again, these are all hypotheticals, and the situation is constantly changing. And as I said, I'll, go back to what I was saying, was that these conversations will be happening,
I'm sure,
and it's down to how are they actually going to achieve, all the hypotheticals that we are possibly discussing now.
Yeah.
You have to stop yourself for just a second, because we could be in danger of getting a 1984 complex on us, where you're wandering about and thinking, is that a drone watching me going to Asda or something like that?
Well, in this case, Chris, I think we're talking about tracing people who have already come forward and said, I have symptoms and have maybe had a diagnosis, and then asking their permission to trace their movements back through, if it came to it, through their mobile phone GPS locator, to just try to find out where they had been and who they had spoken to, because they might not remember everyone that they had come into contact with.
No, that's absolutely correct, Gordon. But I'll go back to what you said earlier about the fact that if someone is showing signs, the advice is the fact that them, and if they're living in a family situation, they should be quarantining for 14 days.
Yeah.
So they should be going out across the door. So therefore, it's very easy to sort of trace, what their actual day-to-day movements.
Okay.
But prior to that, you have literally no idea. It's going to be very difficult to trace.
Yeah.
Back 3 weeks ago.
Well, there are limits, obviously.
Possibly remember, did I go to the garden centre? Yeah. What did I touch? All right, okay, so I touched the trolley, and then my hands were all over the compost, and and right, okay, who had their hands all over the compost before you did? And
of course,
so
Chris,
it's very difficult, Gordon.
Well, listen, I'm going to move on to our next story now, and I knew it wouldn't be long before we came back to the Conservative Party, but here they are again. The Tories have admitted that they didn't consider scrapping universal credit's 5-week wait. The SNP has renewed calls for the UK government to axe the 5-week wait for universal credit, after a Tory minister admitted that they didn't really consider the measure, which would help thousands of people to get financial support. The SNP's Fair Work spokesperson Chris Stevens MP said that the admission in today's Work and Pensions Committee was shocking, and it meant that the Tory government had deliberately chosen to leave people without support that they needed, despite a record £1.5 million universal credit. £1.5 million universal credit claims. In addition, Neil Cooling, the Director General of Change Group within the Department of Work and Pensions, admitted in the meeting that lifting the benefits cap would not be the most difficult thing to do, despite previous government claims that it would be operationally challenging. The SNP has consistently called for the UK government to strengthen welfare protections by scrapping the 5-week wait, reversing the benefit cap and introducing a guaranteed minimum income for everyone. Now, I'd like, first of all, Dave, to get your reaction to this. What do you think? The Conservative Party is now admitting, or rather the Conservative government, I beg your pardon, is now admitting that it never occurred to them to scrap this 5-week wait. Seems incredible.
You're waiting for my reaction. You probably know exactly what my reaction would be. I have yet to find anything about the Tories these days that one can admire or say, that was a good decision, that was a humanitarian decision. They just seem to me to be beyond the pale. Everything they do seems to be either badly thought out or evilly thought out.
But it's the fact that they admitted that it didn't occur to them that they should, scrap this 5-week wait and make it easier for people to get the money that they so badly need in this absolutely, I shudder to use the word unprecedented because it's been used so many times, but in this incredible time that we're living through when people desperately need that financial help.
They are the champions of lack of self-awareness. They're living in a bubble, and it's a bubble of entitlement, and it's just horrendous. I'm beyond words, really.
Well, one thing I can guarantee, Dave, is that Chris is never beyond words when it comes to talking about the Conservative government. Chris, over to you on this one.
Well, no, I'm going to keep myself, or try and keep myself reserved, and I mean this is typical of my comrade Chris Stevens, and it's a great example of holding the government to account, and obviously doing that from distance. I think it's absolutely excellent that he's done this. But the one thing that I want to sort of like. The Tories, it wouldn't even occur to them because they wouldn't have even considered it. They would not consider to be any more helpful or any more compassionate, and that's why it didn't occur to them, because they wouldn't have considered it to start with. I mean, that shouldn't surprise anyone. And and I'm not surprised at Dave's
Chris,
reaction to this story, because you ask any level-headed person what they would think about this story, and they would not be surprised. The Tory government have been accused of taking their eye off the ball of the day job, because they have been concentrating so much on still pursuing Brexit. Like normal everyday things like benefit systems, or
people being able to buy food,
people
things
struggling
like
for money,
Chris,
or they're not concentrating on that. They're still concentrating on December the 31st.
Well,
and
Chris, I'm sorry, I need to stop you there, Chris. I'm sorry, Chris, we've run out of time on this item, but I'm going to move on to something else, which is
Carlo coming on and saying that Chris, he's in step with Nicola Sturgeon for taking a different approach to the government. That's actually a red herring.
Chris, we're going to move on to our next story now. I wasn't sure you could hear me there. The UK government has actually just been challenged on its woeful inaction in support of businesses. The SNP has hit out at the UK government's lack of action in supporting small businesses through the coronavirus crisis, as it emerged that over 10% of interested applicants seeking help had completed applications. During a committee evidence session, the BEIS Secretary, Alok Sharma, confirmed that less than half of the 36,000 loans that had been applied for have actually been approved, but completed applications make up just over 10% of the 300,000 businesses that have inquired about loans, raising the issue of a forgotten majority that the government has left behind. It was also revealed that the total lending to 21st of April is now £2.8 billion, a tiny fraction of the £300 billion scheme. The British Chambers of Commerce have already outlined grave concerns that a concerningly high number of businesses are still finding accessing the scheme too complex and too lengthy, and the CBI has confirmed that many firms are missing out. The BEIS committee member, Alan Brown MP, said this crisis is a crucial time for the UK government to take the pressure off business, but the support laid out by Westminster means that struggling businesses are missing out on billions of pounds of vital funding. The business and industry has been clear they need urgent financial support to get them through this difficult time. While current support risks a forgotten majority left behind by the UK government, the time for action is now. Now, Day, I know that we are always flagging up stories like this. The government seems to be so slow in dealing with things. Here is another example of this, where businesses, and let's face it, that the Conservative Party is supposed to be the party of business, and they don't even seem to be serving their own support group here.
No, but it's deliberate. A great friend of mine who is a local councillor at one of the elections, I can't remember which one, and she asked David Mundell how it was that he managed to get such huge support, people voting him back in place. And very tellingly, this is way back many, many years, he said, "You promise everything and deliver nothing."
Promise everything and deliver nothing.
Yes.
That's quite a remarkable admission. Chris, if I can take this over to you, I know you will have a lot to say about this.
Is very trustworthy and honourable, and she wouldn't repeat something that wasn't true.
Well, I'm sure I take your word for it on that particular subject. Chris, I know this is something else that I'm sure will rattle your cage as well, that small businesses particularly are hit by this crisis as well, and nobody is finding it easy to get whatever help the British government is providing.
No, there's not, and you know, again, it will take the pressure from the SNP parliamentary group, and you know, to hold the UK government to account for their woeful support of SMEs throughout the country.
Thank you, Chris. Listen, thank you for keeping that brief. Our next story concerns asylum seekers. Now, asylum seekers in Scotland need greater protections during the COVID-19 crisis, according to the Scottish Greens. The call comes after it emerged that private housing firm Mears, which is subcontracted by the Home Office, has stopped allowances and moved more than 300 asylum seekers in Glasgow from mainly self-contained apartments into hotels where social distancing is impossible. Reports suggest that many were given no notice that they were being relocated. The Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvey said, "What Mears is doing not only lacks basic decency, it also places vulnerable people into danger during this public health crisis. The UK government needs to urgently intervene. It must be made clear to Mears that relocations must be minimised and no evictions can take place. If anyone has to move, any company contracted by the Home Office should work sensitively with asylum support organisations so that rights to privacy, autonomy and religious freedom are respected. At the very least, financial support for those involved needs to be restored immediately. The UK government should also suspend the no recourse to public funds status, which leaves many of those seeking refuge from war torture and persecution in this country destitute at the end of the asylum process. Chris, I think this is definitely one for you. I mean, you know better than anybody the plight of asylum seekers, having worked with many of them in France fairly recently.
Yeah, this is absolutely shocking, and I'm absolutely seething about this. So if I get taken off air, please excuse me. What this is a deliberate attack by a ruthless government, carried out by a ruthless company, and putting people into severe danger because of their ideology that they pursued last year and the year before that, when it was, I think it was Serco that were in charge, and they had set targets of reclaiming X amount of houses and stuff like that, and dislodging people from their home that was allocated to them, whilst their claims of asylum were being processed. Now, you would think, or you would like to think, that any government worth its salt, would have human compassion for everyone, and I'm talking about every human being, going through this pandemic, and for them to separate and segregate and deny people the basic rights is absolutely heinous. It's absolutely heinous. And not only that, again, I have to point out the 2 points that you have actually read out there, Gordon, which makes me absolutely seething, is the fact that they have taken away the funding, all because that they have been put into a hotel that is serving breakfast, lunch and dinner and has electricity and running water. That is absolutely shocking. These people still need money.
Indeed they do, Chris. Listen, I'd like to bring Day in at this moment. Day, I know you wanted to say something there to Chris. What was your reaction to this news?
Well, the big word is discrimination.
Yeah.
It is, I guess, plain and simple. I mean, it's not only depriving them of their home, but actually removing their money as well at the same time.
Yes.
As far as I understand it, anyway.
But Chris reminded us about the Serco scandal as well. Lessons have not been learned.
I mean, it's as if these people are being treated as illegal immigrants. They're not. They are asylum seekers. They're fleeing persecution.
Yep.
Well, listen, I'd like to move on because we are running a little behind schedule tonight. So our next story moves us to Germany now. And the Chancellor Angela Merkel today urged Germans to show endurance and discipline to get through the coronavirus pandemic that is still at the beginning, and called for a bigger European Union budget to support economic recovery in the bloc. Merkel is worried that the Germans are relaxing their social distancing efforts after the federal and regional governments agreed to reopen some shops this week. Germany has the fifth highest COVID-19 caseload behind the United States, Spain, Italy and France, but has kept fatalities down after early and extensive testing. Germany has reported 148,046 coronavirus cases, with 5,094 deaths. But the latest figures show that cases where people recovering outnumbered new infections. It is precisely because the figures give rise to that hope that I feel obliged to say that this interim result is fragile. We are on thin ice, the thinnest ice even, Merkel told the Bundestag lower house of parliament. We are still far from out of the woods, she said. We are not living in the final phase of the pandemic, but still at the beginning. Germany's gradual easing of restrictions provides social distancing rules to remain in place until May the 3rd. Schools will start reopening from May the 4th with priority for final year students. Hairdressers can also reopen then. Merkel and state leaders will meet again on April the 30th to review how to proceed after May the 3rd. Christian Drosten, the top virologist at Berlin's Charité Hospital, said on Wednesday that widespread testing helped Germany early in the crisis. But with the easing of the lockdown, he said, I regret to see that we are perhaps about to lose this advantage. Retailers whose shops are up to 800 square metres are now allowed to open, along with car and bicycle dealers and bookstores, although they must practice strict social distancing and hygiene rules. If we show the greatest possible endurance and discipline at the beginning of this pandemic, we will be able to return to economic, social, and public life more quickly and sustainably, Merkel said. Now, I think I'd like to talk to you about this one day. Angela Merkel is known for being a very cautious leader. She's obviously worried that since the lockdown is beginning to be eased in Germany, that people don't get too excited about this and end up restarting the epidemic again.
Yes, she was quite strong on that message, wasn't she?
She wasn't. She wasn't pulling her punches. She was quite adamant that people should be responsible. She obviously seems to be worried about this as well, about what her parliament is doing.
Yes, she's certainly warning them, and she's right.
Yep, I think perhaps she is. She has to be cautious. Again, very much echoing what Nicola Sturgeon was saying earlier on today. Chris, do you see any echoes in this? These comments of Angela Merkel's compared to the First Minister's comments today?
I can draw comparisons, from all the female leaders in the developed world. Seem to be taking a very fair and balanced view of things. Yeah. We only have to look at the president of New Zealand, or is it the leader of New Zealand, or whatever?
Yeah.
Who was being very pragmatic and saying, I'm going to take a pay cut, whatnot, what have you, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do the next thing. Whereas you've got the UK bereft of a leader because he's still on the sick.
Yep.
I'm actually waiting for Ian Duncan Smith to see if he's actually going to sign him off the sick, declare him
is he fit for work,
so that he can go back in. One thing's curious in me is that I wonder how he's getting by on his statutory sick pay.
Well,
but then neither here nor there. Back to what you were saying. Yes, definitely, and it's a very principled and pragmatic approach that Angela is taking, or should I say Angela, because she recognises that there is a need to get the economy starting to work again. But again, she's being quite rightly cautious, because the people in the opposition, and this will happen to Nicola as well, that if they make one wrong move, they will jump down their throat, right away. They wouldn't give them an absolute inch.
It must be a minefield for any national leader at the moment. But I noticed that the national leaders who seem at least to be getting the most airtime and the most, shall we say, respect, are all women, Day, interestingly.
Yeah, but then if you look at the species, the male and the female species, the female is always the cautious one, whereas the males are designed to take risks. Females are designed not to take risks.
I guess that maybe stems from a earlier sort of evolution that men went out and hunted and took the risks, and the women made sure and protected the home. Maybe something along those lines.
And that's why the two together make a good combination, because they can balance each other out.
Well, I've just heard in my ear somebody saying they just still hope that men might evolve. I think that was probably our producer. Anyway, I'm going to move us on to our final story, which is a good news story in a way. Okay, the European firms have stepped up the COVID-19 vaccines work, and a UK team has started human trials. Scientists in Britain began clinical trials of a potential COVID-19 vaccine on Thursday, as other vaccine developers across Europe also stepped up work on their own experimental shots against the disease caused by the new coronavirus. A team at Britain's Oxford University dosed the first volunteers in a trial of their vaccine called Chadox-1 nCoV-19. It really rolls off the tongue, that. While Italy's Raythera and Germany's Leukocare and Belgium's Universals also said that they were working together on another potential shot and aim to start trials in a few months. Britain's GSK and France's Sanofi last week announced a similar agreement to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, with trials starting in the second half of the year. As many as 100 potential COVID-19 candidate vaccines are now under development by biotech and research teams around the world, and at least 5 of these are in preliminary testing in people in what are known as phase 1 clinical trials. The Oxford scientists said last week that large-scale production capacity was being put in place to make millions of doses of the Chaadox-1 nCoV-19 shot before the trials, even before the trials show whether it is effective. They said on Thursday that the main focus of initial tests is to find out if this vaccine is going to work against COVID-19, if it won't cause unacceptable side effects, and if it induces good immune responses. A Swiss scientist said on Thursday that he hoped to get ahead of industry projections that COVID-19 vaccine will take about 18 months, with a hope to put his laboratory's version potentially in use in Switzerland this year. Martin Bachmann, the head of immunology at Bern's Inselspital Hospital and the founder of the startup Cyba Biochems, said that he planned to begin human trials in August on 240 volunteers if he gets the necessary approval from the drug watchdog Swissmedic. Instead of using a weakened virus like some vaccines, Bachmann said his team had adopted a virus-like particle that mimics the coronavirus, only without its genetic material needed for replication. The race for a vaccine has been fueled by the shortage of options for treating the disease. The European Union's drug regulator on Thursday reiterated a warning against using 2 older malaria drugs outside of trials or national emergency use programs, citing potentially lethal side effects. I think, Dave, maybe we'll have a chat about this one. So here we're seeing maybe the first little rays of hope, perhaps, that a vaccine is coming. 100 different biolabs are working on this at the moment, and one in Britain testing this week. Sorry, Dave?
Somebody's going to make a fortune. One of them is.
Well, eventually, we'd hope so. Most people are saying, most of the experts have been saying it takes between a year and a half to create a vaccine. But this British first trial this week looks hopeful. I mean, the fact that they've got it to the point where they can trial it at all is surely quite a feat, quite an achievement in such a short time.
Yeah.
You seem very doubtful there. You look a bit...
I just have very little faith in anything that goes on. I mean, Oxford, look at some of the rubbish that has come out of there.
Well, we feel free to disagree there. Chris, what's your opinion on this? We're seeing a lot of frantic activity on vaccines now across Europe and across the world.
Well, I was just actually worried there that, Dave had mentioned Oxford, and my mind just, immediately thought about the Scribbles. But anyway, the British participating within Europe is completely out of sync with what Britain actually wants to do. That I made the point earlier about the whole Brexit shenanigans.
Yeah.
So, whilst there's many countries being reported in Europe that are working on this, sadly, we only find that there's only one in Britain that's actually currently working on this. And pound to a penny, that company is probably either going to be owned by either Matt Hancock or Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, listen, Chris, I'll probably let you get away with the last. I think we'll make that one an allegedly story.
Allegedly, yes.
Allegedly response. But there, I'm afraid we have to end things for this evening. We're just about out of time. But we're coming up to the Thursday 8 o'clock clap as well, of course. So in about 12 seconds, according to the clock on the wall here, Chris is going outside now to clap. I don't know if you feel like joining in tonight, Dave.
Yeah, I'll clap.
Clap for the NHS. Inside. And there we go, right now. I think that's it. 8 o'clock. Yep. Well done, NHS, yet again.
Yes, again.
And thanks to Chris for stepping outside. All right, thank you for that, Chris.
Sorry, my neighbours all out there.
That's great to see, Chris. Thanks for sharing that.
We've also got
Somebody
one of my
doing
neighbours-
a Highland
one of
fling
my
over there,
neighbours,
Chris.
does Highland dancing.
Excellent. Wonderful. Anybody would think that you had organised this in advance, Chris. I don't know. Can you still hear us, Chris? Excellent. We're still getting a good picture. You should find out who that wee lassie is and thank her from us. But remember, keep 2 meters away.
Well, I don't want to interrupt her because it's a great dance, but I can see her mum sitting down there videoing. So I'll try and have a word with her mum tomorrow and find out her name.
That's wonderful, Chris. Thanks very much for that tonight. Okay, well, I think that is just about it. Chris, if you'd like to return to your computer, and I'll be able to wind the show up once you get seated.
Take a wee seat.
Yep, come back in, Chris. There we go. That's you upstaged by a country dancer this time, Chris.
I'm very glad that's actually
Yep.
happened.
Sam Payton had a piper last time, so you've got a country dancer. All we need now is for Day to come up with a comedian, and we'll have a full set. Anyway, listen, that's it. That is it for this evening. I'd like to thank my two guests, Day Tucker and Chris McCusker, for joining me this evening. And of course, as usual, at this time in the evening, I like to ask you for money. So I also wanted to say that since Kenny McBride's amazing question this week, our viewer numbers have shot up. So if you're one of our new viewers and you would like to help support Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now. Go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. And can I thank you, everybody who started to tune in after Chris's big question. And also thank you to everybody who donated as a result of that. And to all of you who have recently signed up as supporters. We are growing rapidly thanks to you. Anyway, that's about it from me this evening at Scotland at 7. I will be back again on Monday. Until then, a very good night to you.
Good night.
Good night, folks.
Good night, Dave. Good night, Chris.
Good night.
Good night, guys.